Okay, this PowerPoint is going to talk about non-experimental designs. So these have lower internal validity. They're used when experimental designs are not feasible, when it's just not possible to do that randomly assigned groups, the pre-test, the post-test. So a lot of times in social work we end up doing non-experimental designs. They have lower internal validity, but they could still have high external validity. So remember, external validity is about how you choose your sample. Okay, and lower internal validity or internal validity is about your research design. So cross-sectional studies examine a phenomenon at one point in time. We talked about this in our live session, so this should be a review. So for example, the U.S. Census, they come out every 10 years and they look at your household and who's in it at one point in time every 10 years. So that's a cross-sectional study. The results might support the plausibility of a cause, but we can't say definitively that there's a cause. Okay, because we're not controlling for any of the threats to internal validity. We can use multivariate statistics to rule out or control for alternative variables. So if you remember in your statistics class, when we use the regression analysis, we are looking at several different variables at a time while controlling for the other ones. Okay, so we're holding other variables constant while we look at each different variable. And that helps to rule out or control, but it still gives us lower internal validity. A case control study is an example of a non-experimental design. This one compares groups of cases that had contrasting outcomes and then collects retrospective data that might help explain it. So if we have the people, the youth who live in the group homes, we could say, let's see, some of those youth, when they leave the group homes, they're successful at staying in school, and some of them are not successful at staying in school. So we might go back and look at them individually and interview them and look at, ask them to talk about what happened between when they left the group home and now. And then we may say, oh, well, look, many of them had criminal justice issues. So we think that that might explain why they're not doing well in school. So that is what retrospective means, looking back and trying to collect data about what might help explain it, the differences. So in this case, we have doubt about how representative, that actually should say sample, not population. That's a typo, I'm sorry. So we have doubt about how representative the sample is. And so it also has lower external validity because we're looking at these people from the group home, but we didn't randomly sample them. So we're not sure they actually represent everybody from youth groups, right? There might be recall bias. Their memories might be faulty. And we may find out that there's other things that we didn't ask about. So we're not controlling for any of the threats to internal validity, and there might be some issues with external validity. So a case control study would be low, could be low in both internal and external validity. But it's frequently done in social work because that's how we can collect our data. A longitudinal study describes a process that occurs over time, and observations are conducted over an extended period of time. So this increases the internal validity by establishing a timeline. Remember, we talked about one of the threats to internal validity is not knowing if ambiguity about which variable came first, right? If we do a longitudinal study, we can control for that. We know which variable came first because we have this time period to look at. We can also use multivariate statistics to account for spurious relationships. So we can do our regression analysis to hold other variables constant that might be interfering with our results. But a longitudinal study is usually a non-experimental design because we aren't doing that random assigning to groups, pre-test and post-test. However, it gives us higher internal validity than a cross-sectional because it establishes our time order. Okay, so that's the end of our non-experimental design PowerPoint. I want to talk about a couple things to keep in mind, our takeaway message for our activity. You're going to look at 3 articles, maybe 4, I can't remember, and you're going to rank them. And I've given you a chart to rank them on. I want you to read them and look at their sampling plan, and I want you to decide if they have high or low external validity based on the sampling plan. Did they use probability or non-probability sampling? Okay, that's what you're looking for. Then I want you to look at the research design. Is it experimental or non-experimental? So you want to try to identify what kind of design they used. They may or may not say it. You might have to figure it out. And figure out what is the internal validity. Is it higher or lower based on the research design? Okay, and then it's going to ask you some questions about how confident you feel in generalizing this to another population and using it with your own case. So again, when you're reading these studies in our activity, you're looking at the sampling plan and you're looking at the research design. Don't get caught up in all the other stuff because it could distract you and interfere with what you're actually looking for. So look at the sampling plan and the research design. And if you have questions, as usual, email me.